Access to an area where radioactive isotopes are manipulated, called the controlled area, is managed by very strict legislation for protection against radiation. We're going to discover these rules step by step, as well as the practical aspects linked to them. On top of that, some training is compulsory before people are allowed to manipulate radioactive material. The area where radioactive isotopes are manipulated is indicated by a public notice on which different pieces of interesting information can be found, such as the notice, controlled area, the telephone numbers in case of problems, the radioisotopes which are used, and the name of the person in charge of this specific area. As soon as you enter the control area, as in any other kind of laboratory, you have to remember for your own protection to put on a laboratory coat with long sleeves and also gloves, which if possible cover the sleeves of your lab coat. Everybody who is professionally exposed to radiation, which is the case if you work with radioisotopes, should wear a system for monitoring the dose likely to be received. This dosimeter is strictly individual and should be placed on the chest for optimal measurements. This dosimetric system is essential as it allows you to check that you're working in good conditions with respect to your radio protection and that the materials which are available in the lab for your protection are sufficient. For an efficient follow-up, don't forget to exchange your dosimeter on a regular basis. The person who is in charge of the dosimeters in your lab will help you to respect the schedule related to this. This area is shared with many other people. For an appropriate and global management and the security of everyone involved, please register in the book provided for this purpose with your name and the date of the experiment. The regulatory laws in the field of radiation protection are very strict. You must not eat or drink, nor bring personal belongings into the laboratory. Please leave your mobile phone out of the controlled area. You would not like to have your phone taken away for a while as it is contaminated, would you? The isotopes that are manipulated most in the research laboratories are subdivided into two main categories: the gamma emitters and the beta emitters, the last category being subdivided again into two groups regarding the type of protection required. Iodine 125 is the gamma emitter that is most commonly used in the laboratory. For its manipulation we use a protection screen made of lead glass or potentially lead sheets depending on the amount that is manipulated. However, you should already know that as a function of the type of radiation or particle that you deal with, different types of materials can be used. We'll come back to that later. In addition to the shielding, the distance and the time are also very important parameters when radioactive materials are used or when irradiation can happen. Never forget that the further away the radioactive source is, and the less time you spend near the source, the smaller the dose that you could receive. Now let's come back to iodine 125. The manipulation of radioactive isotopes should be done on a limited surface of the laboratory table to avoid a potential dissemination of the activity in case of contamination. For that purpose, the laboratory table is delimited by protective paper and a sticker with the radioactive symbol on it. So, protective paper covers the table, so make sure that the absorbing side of the paper is placed upwards to absorb any potential contamination by the isotope. So, for this manipulation you need a lead glass shielding, absorbing paper for the table, a container for the radioactive waste or potentially contaminated waste near your working area to avoid having to go to the other side of the laboratory in case of spillage. And finally, an adequate detector for the measurement of the gamma rays, for example, a scintillator counter. It is important, if you did not prepare the workplace yourself, to check the potential presence of contamination on the working surfaces or materials before starting work. Once all the materials are ready and available, you can go and look for the radioactive source in the refrigerator, the place often used to store radioactive sources. As you will notice, a radioactive symbol is present on the door of the refrigerator. Indeed, you have to know that every kind of material containing radioactive isotopes or susceptible to be contaminated by activity should have the radioactive symbol on it. What to do next? Do not forget to write in the inventory book of the radioactive sources the information regarding the activity that you performed, the isotope, the date of the manipulation, and the name of the manipulator should also be written down. This requirement is not there to annoy you, it is required by regulations. Ensure that the radioactive source is behind the protection screen and all the manipulation is also done behind it. The amount of solution you need can now be taken and the manipulation can be started in complete safety. The procedure is now finished. However, this does not mean that it is completely finished for you. Indeed, the rest of the radioactive solution, placed appropriately back into its lead container, should be brought back to the refrigerator for safety. The radioactive material, or anything suspected of having been contaminated, has become radioactive waste that will need to be disposed of in the appropriate radioactive waste container. The radioactive waste cannot, in any case, be disposed of with the normal waste. Believe us, it is always a problem to find radioactive waste in normal waste. After each manipulation, the waste containers of your workplace containing the radioactive waste should be put in the room called waste. To condition the waste appropriately, look at the protocol of radioactive waste management, which is on the wall of the waste room. It will show you how to deal appropriately with the combustible waste, paper, gloves, PVC. This kind of radioactive waste is placed in plastic bags, on which the radioactive symbol is drawn. Compressible waste such as glass, metal, is placed in metal boxes previously lined with a plastic bag. In this way the metal box will be recycled. As for liquid radioactive waste, it is forbidden to pour it into the sinks on the entire university site, so it will be put into big green plastic bottles especially provided for that purpose. Do not forget to separate the aqueous from the organic liquid waste. An inventory of the radioactive waste coming in and coming out from the waste room should also be performed. If there is a problem regarding the waste management, please contact the person in charge of the radioactive waste who will help you manage it. The procedure is now finished. Clean up your workplace and check for the absence of contamination. Checking for the presence of potential contamination is an essential step in the process of manipulating radioactive isotopes. With the adequate detector, check not only the working surfaces but also the materials that you've used. Think of your colleagues and also think of yourself by controlling your hands and also your lab coat. You will then avoid dissemination of potential contamination outside the laboratory. The manipulation of a high-energy beta emitter like P32, a frequently used isotope in the laboratory, requires some adaptations regarding the protection in comparison to what we described for I-125. The main difference concerns the protection screen to be placed for protecting yourself. The screen will be made of plexiglass and not lead. 1 centimeter plexiglass is sufficient to stop and absorb most of the energetic beta emitters. It is advisable when manipulating P32 to use pliers. Remember that distance is important in terms of dose delivery and will allow you to limit the dose that could be received by your hands in direct contact with the source. The most appropriate apparatus to detect beta emitters is equipped with a GIGA detector. In terms of the rest of the manipulation, all the radiation protection aspects that were described for I-125 can be applied. The manipulation of low-energy beta emitters like H3, S35 or C14 does not require the use of protection screens. However, it can be useful to protect yourself against spotting. There is no problem in terms of external exposure with these kinds of isotopes. The advantage in terms of external exposure is unfortunately a disadvantage with regard to the control method. There is no direct way to control the potential contamination on the working surfaces or on your hand. The manipulation of this category of isotopes requires even more attention to avoid contamination. This is a good moment to mention the medical follow-up of the workers. The only way we have to check for the absence of internal contamination in H3 for the worker is a urine analysis when you have a medical appointment with the doctor in charge of the follow-up of the workers. As a professional exposed to radiation, you should have a medical follow-up once or twice a year. If some radioactive solution is dispersed on the floor or even in another place, do not worry. Wear gloves and use absorbing paper to soak up and remove the contamination by always starting from the outside and going into the inside. In this way, you will avoid dispersion of the contamination. With the appropriate detector, check that all the contamination has been removed, and if necessary, start again with the help of humid absorbing paper. Check again for the presence of any residual contamination. Contamination of the hands is an incident which can be managed very easily. Again, do not panic. To wash your contaminated hands, use soap and warm water. Do not use hot water as it will favor internal contamination. In case of an incident or accident, do not hesitate to contact the Radiation Protection Department, SUCPR. When you leave the laboratory, do not forget to take your dosimeter with you. It is personal and it should not be kept in the controlled area.
Don't worry for any new manipulation or any problem related to the manipulation of radioactive isotopes. The team of the Radiation Protection Department of the University of Liège will help you to look for the best way to assure your radiological protection. Our mission is, of course, to check that all the regulatory aspects are respected in terms of radiation protection and to make sure that your work is performed in the safest condition. You will find interesting information like specific description of all risks related to many different isotopes on our website, and I invite you to consult it to obtain advice on their manipulations. And I wish you every success.